Sarah Whitmore stood frozen in the doorway as her mother's laughter cut through the morning air like broken glass. A marriage proposal had arrived, not for her beautiful sisters, but for her, the unwanted daughter, the one they called stubborn, difficult, worthless. Her father was already celebrating, calling it finally getting rid of the problem. But the wealthy rancher who'd asked for her hand wasn't the fool they thought he was. He'd seen something in Sarah her own family had spent 24 years trying to destroy, and he was about to prove that the daughter they threw away was worth more than all of them combined. If you want to see how a woman rejected by her own blood became the most powerful voice in the frontier, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The mountain cold bit through the wooden walls of the Whitmore house that November morning, but inside the kitchen, the air burned hotter than any fire. Sarah Whitmore stood at the wash basin, hands red and cracked from scrubbing pots since dawn, when she heard her mother's voice spike with excitement in the front room. That particular tone, sharp, hungry, only appeared when money or status entered the conversation. She dried her hands slowly, listening. A marriage proposal? Her father's voice boomed through the thin walls. From Caleb Mercer himself, the cattle baron? Sarah's chest tightened. Her two younger sisters, Margaret and Caroline, were both of marrying age. Beautiful girls, their mother always said. Obedient, the kind of daughters who knew how to smile at powerful men and keep their mouths shut when it mattered. Sarah had never mastered either skill. Which one did he ask for? Her mother's words dripped with anticipation. Margaret, I assume. She's got the face for it. Or Caroline, she's got that sweet disposition men like. The pause that followed stretched too long. Neither. Her father's voice carried confusion. He asked for Sarah. The explosion of laughter hit like a physical blow. Her mother's cackle mixed with Margaret's high-pitched giggle and Caroline's nervous titter. Even her father chuckled, though his held an edge of disbelief. Sarah's hands gripped the edge of the basin. Sarah? Her mother was practically shrieking now. That man must be simple-minded, or blind, or both. Maybe he needs a ranch hand, not a wife, Margaret offered, and the room erupted again. Sarah forced herself to move toward the doorway. She stopped just outside the front room, where she could see them gathered around her father's desk, her whole family, united in their amusement at her expense. Her father held a formal letter, cream-colored paper with a wax seal already broken. Says here he's seen her character and finds it admirable. He said the word like it tasted bad. Wants to marry her within the month. Character. Her mother spat the word. Is that what we're calling stubbornness now? The girl argues with everyone, questions everything, can't keep her opinions to herself for 5 minutes. What kind of man wants that in a wife? A fool, Caroline said quietly. Or someone playing a cruel joke. No. Her father's voice took on a calculating tone. Caleb Mercer doesn't make jokes. Man's got the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, owns half the valley, sits on the territorial council. This is legitimate. Then he'll regret it soon enough, her mother said. Sarah will embarrass him within a week. She'll probably argue with his ranch hands, insult his business partners, make him a laughingstock. Give it a month before he sends her back in disgrace. Let him find out the hard way what we've dealt with for 24 years, her father agreed. At least she'll be his problem instead of ours. Margaret's voice turned sly. And when he does send her back, maybe he'll be interested in a real wife, someone who knows how to act like a lady. The laughter started again, but Sarah had heard enough. She stepped into the doorway. The room went quiet, but their faces told her everything. Not shame at being overheard, not even discomfort. Just that same exhausted irritation they always wore when looking at her, like she was a stain on expensive fabric they couldn't quite scrub out. So it's decided then, Sarah said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You're accepting the proposal. Her father set down the letter. Don't see why not. Man's offering a fair bride price, and frankly, girl, you're not getting any younger. At 24, you're lucky anyone's asking at all. Lucky. Sarah repeated the word, tasting its bitterness. Is that what you think this is? I think it's the best offer you're ever going to get, her mother said flatly. So yes, we're accepting. You'll leave in 5 days. That gives me time to gather your things and make the arrangements. Make sure you pack her working dresses, Margaret added with a smirk. I doubt she'll need anything nice where she's going. Caroline giggled again, then tried to hide it behind her hand when Sarah's eyes cut toward her. 5 days? Sarah repeated. Something hard settled in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite relief. Something colder. More final. Fine. Her father frowned, suspicious of her calm tone. You're agreeing, just like that? No arguments? What would be the point? Sarah met his eyes directly. You've made it clear I'm a burden you're eager to be rid of. Why would I fight to stay where I'm not wanted? The words landed with unexpected weight. Her mother's mouth tightened. Margaret looked away first. Don't be dramatic, her father muttered, already turning back to his desk. We're doing what's best for everyone. You'll thank us eventually. But Sarah was already walking away, back toward the kitchen, where the half-washed pots waited. Behind her, the conversation resumed, her mother listing everything that needed to be done, her sisters already planning how they'd redecorate Sarah's room once she left. She plunged her hands back into the cold wash water and stared out the small window above the basin. The mountains rose in the distance, dark and jagged against the gray November sky. Black Hollow Ridge was all she'd ever known, this house, this town, this family that had spent her entire life making sure she understood she wasn't good enough. Somewhere out in those mountains, a man she'd never met had asked to marry her. Not Margaret, with her perfect blonde curls and practiced smile. Not Caroline, with her soft voice and careful manners. Her. Sarah didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did neither. She just scrubbed the pots until her knuckles bled and told herself that whatever waited for her in those mountains couldn't possibly be worse than what she was leaving behind. She was wrong about that. It was going to be so much stranger. Vamos. The next 5 days crawled past like wounded animals. Sarah's mother moved through the house with barely contained glee, treating the wedding preparations like a particularly satisfying house cleaning. She packed Sarah's belongings with the efficiency of someone disposing of clutter, old work dresses, a few books, the simple wooden hairbrush Sarah had owned since childhood. You won't need your Sunday dress, her mother announced on the second day, holding up the one nice garment Sarah owned. Margaret can have it. You'll be working on a ranch, not attending socials. Sarah, folding a worn quilt on her bed, didn't look up. Keep it. Her mother paused. You're not even going to argue? Why would I? The question hung in the air. Her mother set down the dress, her face pinched with something that might have been guilt in a different woman. Sarah, I know you think we're being cruel, but I don't think anything, Sarah interrupted quietly. Not anymore. That was the truth. Something had shifted in her the moment she'd overheard their laughter. It wasn't anger burning in her chest now. It was something colder and cleaner. Acceptance, maybe. Or just the final death of hope. She'd spent 24 years trying to be good enough, trying to make them proud, trying to understand what she'd done wrong that made her own parents look at her with such disappointment. Now she knew the answer, nothing and everything. She'd been born wrong somehow, too loud, too stubborn, too honest, and no amount of trying would ever fix that in their eyes. So she'd stopped trying. Her mother left without finishing whatever justification she'd been building, and Sarah returned to her packing alone. That afternoon, Caroline slipped into her room while Sarah was sorting through books. Her younger sister hovered in the doorway, worrying her bottom lip, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Can I ask you something? Caroline's voice was soft, uncertain. Sarah glanced up. If you're here to gloat, save your breath. I'm not... Caroline stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I wanted to know if you're scared. The question caught Sarah off guard. She set down the book in her hands, a collection of frontier poetry someone had left at the house years ago, and really looked at her sister. Caroline was 19, pretty in that delicate way their mother prized, with pale blonde hair and light blue eyes that always seemed on the verge of tears. She'd never been cruel to Sarah, not directly. She just laughed when Margaret did, agreed when their parents did, stayed silent when it would have cost something to speak up. Yes, Sarah admitted, I'm terrified. Caroline moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. Then why aren't you fighting this? Fighting what? A chance to leave? Sarah returned to her books, stacking them carefully. You heard them, Caroline. I'm the embarrassment, the mistake. They're thrilled to be rid of me. That's not... But Caroline stopped because they both knew it was true. Mama says awful things sometimes, But she doesn't mean them. Not really. She means every word. Sarah's voice stayed level. And so does Papa and Margaret. And if I'm being honest, so do you. That's not fair, isn't it? Sarah finally turned to face her sister fully. How many times have you stood up for me, Caroline? When Margaret mocks me at dinner? When Mama calls me difficult in front of visitors? When Papa tells me I should be more like you and Margaret, more quiet, more obedient, more invisible? Caroline's eyes welled up. I don't know what to say when they talk like that. You could say something, anything. Sarah's voice cracked despite herself. But you never do. None of you do. So don't come in here now pretending you care whether I'm scared. The tears spilled over Caroline's cheeks. I do care. You're my sister. No, Sarah said quietly. I'm the family burden. There's a difference. Caroline left without another word, and Sarah returned to her packing with shaking hands. That night, Margaret cornered her in the hallway. I hope you know what you're doing, Margaret said, arms crossed. She was 22, beautiful in the way their mother had always wanted. Golden hair, elegant posture, a smile that could charm money from a miser's pocket. Caleb Mercer isn't some naive farm boy. He's going to expect a proper wife. Sarah met her sister's eyes. Then I suppose he'll be disappointed. You're going to embarrass yourself. Margaret's voice carried genuine conviction. You can't even make it through Sunday dinner without arguing with Papa about politics or business or whatever else you think you understand. What makes you think you can survive as the wife of a territorial councilman? Maybe I can't, Sarah said, but that's not your problem anymore, is it? Margaret's perfect facade cracked slightly. Why do you have to be like this? Why can't you just try? Try to be pleasant, try to fit in, try to make things easier instead of always making them harder. I did try, Sarah said. For years. It was never enough. Because you give up too easily. Margaret's voice rose. You get frustrated, and then you argue, and then everyone's upset, and then you act like you're the victim when really you brought it all on yourself. Sarah stared at her sister, really looked at her, and saw something she'd never quite noticed before. Margaret wasn't just beautiful and perfect. She was exhausted. The smile, the grace, the charm, it was all work. Constant, grinding work. And Margaret had built her entire identity on doing that work better than anyone else. Sarah's existence was a threat to that, because Sarah had stopped trying, and the world hadn't ended. You're right, Sarah said quietly. I did give up. But not on them, Margaret. On pretending to be someone I'm not. Maybe that makes me difficult. Maybe that makes me a failure. But at least I'm honest about who I am. She walked past her sister without waiting for a response. The morning of her departure arrived with frost on the windows and gray clouds pressing down on the mountains. Sarah woke before dawn, dressed in her warmest traveling clothes, and carried her single trunk downstairs alone. Her father was waiting in the front room, hat already on, pocket watch in hand. Wagon leaves at 7. Mercer's sending a driver. I know. Sarah set down the trunk. Your mother's not coming to see you off, says she's got a headache. Of course she does. Her father's jaw tightened. You could show a little gratitude, girl. We could have refused this proposal, left you here to become an old maid, a permanent burden on this family. Sarah looked at him. This man who'd taught her to ride when she was 6, who'd once called her his brave little girl when she climbed too high in a tree and got scared, who'd slowly, steadily turned cold as she grew into someone he didn't recognize. Thank you, she said, for getting rid of me. His face flushed. That's not what I... Yes, it is. Sarah's voice didn't shake. And you know what? I'm grateful. You're giving me something you never intended to. Freedom. From this house, from your disappointment, from spending the rest of my life trying to become someone you'd actually love. So thank you, Papa. Truly. She picked up her trunk and walked out the door before he could respond. The wagon was waiting in the yard, a sturdy freight wagon with a canvas cover and a driver who looked like he'd been carved from the same mountain stone as the ridge. He was maybe 50, weathered and quiet, with kind eyes that took in Sarah's single trunk without comment. Name's Tom, he said, taking her trunk and securing it in the wagon bed. I'm Mr. Mercer's foreman, been with him 15 years. Sarah Whitmore. She climbed onto the bench seat. How long is the journey? 2 days if the weather holds. There's an inn where we'll stop tonight. Tom climbed up beside her and took the reins. You ever been out past Copper Falls? No, I've never left Black Hollow Ridge. Tom nodded, said nothing else, and clicked to the horses. As the wagon rolled forward, Sarah turned to look back at the house one last time. Her father stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her leave with an expression she couldn't quite read. Margaret appeared at an upstairs window, face pale. Caroline was nowhere to be seen. Sarah faced forward and didn't look back again. They rode in silence for the first hour, the wagon creaking along the rough mountain road. The landscape grew wilder with each mile. Fewer farms, fewer houses, more trees pressing close to the narrow path. The mountains rose higher here, dark and imposing. Finally, Tom spoke. Mr. Mercer's a fair man, runs a tight operation, treats his workers decent, pays on time, doesn't tolerate lazy hands, but doesn't tolerate cruelty either. Sarah nodded, unsure how to respond. Heard some things about your family, Tom continued carefully. About how they talk about you. She stiffened. From who? Small territory. People talk, especially when it involves the Mercer Ranch. Tom kept his eyes on the road. For what it's worth, Miss Whitmore, Mr. Mercer doesn't listen to gossip. He makes his own judgments. What if his judgment is wrong? Sarah heard herself ask. What if I'm exactly what my family says I am? Difficult, argumentative, impossible to live with. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then, is that what you think you are? I don't know what I am anymore? Well, Tom guided the horses around a sharp bend. Maybe this is your chance to find out. Away from people who've already decided for you. Something about those words loosened the knot in Sarah's chest, just slightly. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the provisions Tom had packed. Bread, dried meat, hard cheese. Sarah sat on a fallen log at the edge of the road, staring at the mountains that surrounded them on all sides now. Why did he choose me? She asked suddenly. Tom, checking the horses' hooves, glanced over. Mr. Mercer? Everyone keeps asking me the same thing. My family couldn't understand it. I don't understand it. I'm not beautiful like my sisters. I'm not charming or obedient or any of the things men want in a wife. So why? Tom straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. Did he tell you why, in the proposal letter? I never saw the letter. My father read it, then accepted on my behalf. Tom's face darkened. That right? It doesn't matter. I just want to understand what I'm walking into. The foreman studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. It's not my story to tell, Miss Whitmore. Mr. Mercer will explain when he's ready. But I can tell you this. He didn't choose you on a whim. He knows exactly who you are. That should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her. They reached the inn just as darkness fell. A rough frontier establishment that smelled of tobacco smoke and wet wool. Tom got Sarah a private room, small but clean, and told her they'd leave at dawn. Sarah lay awake most of the night, listening to voices from the tavern below, wondering what kind of man asked to marry a woman he'd never spoken to, wondering what he'd seen in her that everyone else had missed. The second day of travel was colder, the clouds lower and darker. Tom said little, focused on navigating the increasingly rough terrain. They were deep in the valley now, following a river that cut through the mountains like an old wound. Then as they rounded a curve in the road, the valley opened up. Sarah's breath caught. The Mercer Ranch sprawled across the valley floor like its own small kingdom. The main house stood at the center, 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with a wide porch and glass windows that caught what little light broke through the clouds. Barns and outbuildings surrounded it in organized clusters. Fenced pastures stretched toward the mountains, dotted with cattle that looked like dark stones from this distance. But what struck Sarah most was the sense of order. Everything had its place. Nothing was haphazard or makeshift. This wasn't a frontier homestead scratching by. This was an empire built with precision and discipline. Home, Tom said simply, and urged the horses forward. As they descended into the valley, ranch hands stopped their work to watch the wagon pass. Sarah caught glimpses of curious faces, heard whispered conversations die as they approached. Everyone knew who she was and why she was here. The weight of their attention pressed down on her shoulders. Tom pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. Before Sarah could climb down, the front door opened, and Caleb Mercer stepped onto the porch. He wasn't what she'd expected. She'd pictured someone older, harder, a wealthy rancher who'd grown fat and soft with success. Instead, Caleb Mercer looked like he'd been carved from the same unforgiving frontier that had shaped these mountains. Maybe 35, tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw sharp enough to draw blood. His eyes were gray, or maybe hazel, she couldn't tell in this light, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to step backward. He was handsome in that brutal, weathered way some frontier men were, but it wasn't his appearance that caught her off guard. It was the way he looked at her, like he was seeing someone he already knew. Miss Whitmore. His voice was low, rough. Welcome to Mercer Valley. Sarah climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help, landing harder than she'd intended on the packed earth. She forced herself to meet his eyes directly. Mr. Mercer. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I assume you're still willing to go through with this. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. Are you asking if I've changed my mind? Everyone else thinks you should. Everyone else isn't standing here. He descended the porch steps, stopping a few feet away. I asked for you specifically, Miss Whitmore. That hasn't changed. Even though you don't know me, even though we've never spoken, even though... She stopped herself, aware she was already doing what her family had always criticized, arguing, questioning, pushing. But Caleb didn't look annoyed. If anything, he looked satisfied. Even though, he agreed. Tom, get her trunk. Sarah, may I call you Sarah? She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Sarah, you must be exhausted. I'll have someone show you to your room. We can talk properly tomorrow, after you've rested. I'd rather talk now. The words came out before she could stop them. I need to understand why I'm here. Caleb held her gaze. The ranch sounds faded around them, cattle lowing in the distance, hands calling to each other, the wind moving through the valley. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, all right, come inside. He led her into the house, through a front room that was surprisingly comfortable, worn furniture, thick rugs, a stone fireplace large enough to stand in. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle on the sideboard and handed her one without asking if she wanted it. Sarah took it, more out of shock than anything else. They stood facing each other in the dimming afternoon light. Outside, Tom's voice called instructions to someone about the trunk. A door closed somewhere deeper in the house. 3 years ago, Caleb said finally, I was in Black Hollow Ridge on business. Stopped in the market to pick up supplies. While I was there, I watched you defend an old man. Sarah's hand tightened on the glass. She remembered. Of course she remembered. It had been one of the worst days of her life. The day her mother had stopped speaking to her for a week. The day her father had called her a disgrace at dinner. The day Margaret had said Sarah's heroics were really just desperate bids for attention. He was starving, she said quietly. The merchant was charging him double price for flour because the man couldn't read the sign. Everyone could see what was happening. No one did anything. Except you. I just told the truth. Called him out in front of everyone. She met Caleb's eyes. My family was humiliated. Said I made a scene. Said I should have minded my own business. But you didn't mind your business. Caleb took a drink. You stood there in the middle of that market in front of 60 people, and you made that merchant return the old man's money. Made him apologize. Made him look like the cheat he was. And my family never let me forget it. I never forgot it either. Caleb set down his glass. I watched you that day, Sarah Whitmore. Watched you stand alone while everyone else stayed silent. Watched you fight for someone who had nothing when walking away would have been easier, and I thought, that's the woman I want beside me. Sarah's throat tightened. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you don't back down when something's wrong. I know you value truth over comfort. I know you're willing to pay the cost of doing what's right, even when it's hard. He paused. That's more than most people ever show me. My family thinks I'm difficult. Good. The word landed between them like a stone. Sarah stared at him. Good? I don't need easy, Sarah. I need honest. I need someone who'll tell me the truth even when I don't want to hear it. I need a partner who won't smile and nod while I make mistakes. He stepped closer. Your family wanted you quiet and obedient. I want you exactly as you are. Something broke open in Sarah's chest. Not relief, not quite. Something rawer and more painful. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's mine to make. Caleb's eyes didn't waver. The question is whether you're willing to take the same risk. Whether you're willing to try building something here with someone who actually wants the parts of you everyone else tried to silence. Sarah looked down at the whiskey in her hand, golden in the dying light. She thought about her mother's laughter, her father's disappointment, Margaret's perfect smile, and Caroline's guilty silence. She thought about spending the rest of her life trying to be someone she wasn't. Then she looked back up at Caleb Mercer, this strange, intense man who'd asked for her hand based on a single moment 3 years ago, and made her choice. "I'm willing to try," she said. His face didn't change, but something eased in his shoulders. "Then we'll figure out the rest as we go." He raised his glass. After a moment, Sarah raised hers. They drank in silence as the last light faded from the valley and the first stars appeared above the mountains that would become her home. Sarah woke the next morning to sounds she didn't recognize. Cattle bellowing in the distance, men's voices calling out instructions, the rhythmic clang of a hammer on metal somewhere outside. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then the unfamiliar weight of the quilt, the strange angle of sunlight through the window, the solid timber walls instead of thin plaster, it all came rushing back. She was in Caleb Mercer's house, in the valley, miles from Black Hollow Ridge and everything she'd ever known. The room he'd given her was larger than her old one, with actual furniture, a bed frame instead of just a mattress on the floor, a wardrobe that didn't stick when you opened it, a washstand with a porcelain basin that wasn't chipped. Someone had already brought up her trunk and left a pitcher of clean water. Sarah dressed quickly in one of her work dresses, plain brown wool, patched at the elbows, and tried to do something with her hair. Unlike Margaret, who could create elaborate styles with pins and ribbons, Sarah had always just braided it and hoped for the best. This morning was no different. She found her way downstairs by following the smell of coffee and bacon. The kitchen was larger than her family's entire front room, with a massive iron stove and windows that looked out over the valley. A woman stood at the stove, maybe 60, gray-haired, built like she could wrestle a steer and win. "You must be Sarah." The woman didn't turn around. "Sit, you look half-starved." Sarah hesitated in the doorway. "I can help." "I said sit." The woman turned, wielding a spatula like a weapon. "Name's Ruth. Been cooking for this ranch since before Caleb owned it. You want to help in my kitchen? You can start tomorrow once you know where things are. Today you sit and eat." There was no arguing with that tone. Sarah sat. Ruth slid a plate in front of her. Eggs, bacon, thick slices of bread with real butter, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. "Caleb's already been up since 4. He'll be back around mid-morning. Told me to make sure you ate proper." Sarah picked up her fork. The food was better than anything her mother had ever made, which felt like a small betrayal to notice. "How many people work here? Counting ranch hands, stable workers, and seasonal help?" "About 40 during busy months, 20 year-round." Ruth poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter. "It's a big operation. Caleb runs it tight but fair. You'll figure out the rhythm quick enough if you're smart." "And if I'm not?" Ruth's eyes were sharp but not unkind. "Then you'll struggle. But Caleb doesn't choose stupid people, so I'm guessing you'll be fine." Sarah ate in silence, aware of Ruth watching her with that assessing look older women had perfected. Measuring, judging, but not yet deciding. Outside, a group of men rode past the window on horseback, kicking up dust. "They talk about me already?" Sarah asked quietly. "The ranch hands?" "Of course they do. New wife showing up out of nowhere? That's gossip gold." Ruth refilled Sarah's coffee without asking. "Most of them heard the stories from Black Hollow Ridge, about how your family treated you, about the market incident." Sarah's hand tightened on her cup. "What do they think? That Caleb's either brave or crazy?" Ruth's face softened slightly. "But Tom told them what he saw on the ride here. That you didn't complain, didn't cry, didn't act like some delicate flower needing protection. Said you asked real questions and handled yourself steady. That bought you some respect." "Tom barely said 10 words to me the whole trip. Tom says more with silence than most people say with speeches." Ruth collected Sarah's empty plate. "He's a good judge of character. If he vouches for you, that matters around here." Before Sarah could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Caleb walked in, bringing cold air and the smell of horses with him. He stopped when he saw Sarah, like he'd half expected her to have disappeared overnight. You slept all right? His voice was rougher than she remembered, probably from shouting orders all morning. Yes, thank you. Good. He poured himself coffee, movement sufficient. I need to ride out to the north pasture today. Check on the herd before the weather turns. You can come with me if you want. See the operation. It wasn't really a question, but it also wasn't quite an order. Sarah stood. I'd like that. Ruth made a sound that might have been approval and handed Sarah a thick coat from a peg by the door. It's colder up there. And windier. Don't let her freeze, Caleb. I won't. He drained his coffee in 3 gulps and headed for the door. Sarah followed, pulling on the coat, too big for her, probably one of Caleb's, and trying not to trip over the hem. The stable was warm and dim, smelling of hay and leather and horses. Caleb moved through it with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, saddling 2 horses with quick, practiced movements. You ride? He asked, cinching a strap tight. Some. Mostly just farm horses. Nothing fancy. This isn't fancy either. Her name's Juniper. She's steady, won't spook easy. He handed Sarah the reins. Mount up. Sarah managed to get into the saddle without embarrassing herself, though not as smoothly as Caleb, who swung onto his horse like it was the most natural thing in the world. They rode out of the stable into bright morning sunlight that made her squint. The valley looked different in daylight, bigger, wilder, more real. The mountains pressed in on all sides, dark with pine trees, their peaks lost in clouds. The ranch buildings were scattered across the valley floor like chess pieces on a board, connected by dirt roads and fence lines. They rode in silence for the first mile. Sarah focused on staying in the saddle and not looking like a complete fool. Caleb rode ahead slightly, occasionally glancing back to check on her but saying nothing. Finally, as they climbed a ridge that overlooked a massive pasture filled with cattle, he slowed and waited for her to catch up. This is the main herd, he said, gesturing at the cattle below. About 800 head right now. We'll move them to winter pasture in 2 weeks. Sarah looked at the sea of cattle, at the ranch hands working the edges of the herd, at the sheer scale of the operation. How did you build all this? Slowly. Started with 20 head and a piece of land nobody else wanted. Caleb's horse shifted beneath him, and he steadied it with barely a thought. Took 15 years to build it to this. 15 years. Sarah tried to imagine it, the patience, the discipline, the sheer stubborn determination required. You must have been young when you started. 20. Stupid and broke. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Made every mistake you can make in ranching. Lost money, lost cattle, nearly lost the land twice. But I learned. What made you keep going? He looked at her then, really looked at her. Because quitting meant going back to working for someone else. Meant taking orders from men who got rich off other people's sweat. I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on someone else's. Something in those words resonated in Sarah's chest. That stubborn refusal to accept what everyone else said you should be. She understood that feeling better than he probably realized. They rode along the ridge, Caleb pointing out different sections of the ranch, explaining the rotation system for the herds, the water rights agreements with neighboring ranches, the constant battle against drought and harsh winters. He talked like someone who'd thought about every detail, planned for every disaster. You run this whole operation yourself? Sarah asked. Tom handles most of the day-to-day. I make the big decisions, deal with the business side, handle problems that come up. But I work alongside the hands when needed. Can't ask men to respect you if you're not willing to do the same work they do. They stopped at a creek that cut through the valley, letting the horses drink. Sarah dismounted, less gracefully than she'd have liked, and stretched her already sore legs. My father always hired men to do the real work, she said, staring at the water. Said it was beneath him to labor like a common hand, but then he'd complain about lazy workers and poor results. A lot of men like that in the territory. Caleb stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cold air. They wonder why their operations fail while blaming everyone but themselves. Is that why you chose someone like me? Someone who's not afraid to work? That's part of it. He was quiet for a moment. But mostly I chose you because you stood up for that old man when it would have been easier not to. Everything else, the work ethic, the honesty, the backbone, all of that was already there in that moment. I just recognized it. Sarah turned to face him. You're putting a lot of faith in one incident from 3 years ago. Maybe, but I've been reading people for a long time, Sarah. Had to survive out here. And I'm rarely wrong. His gray eyes held hers. Are you? Am I what? Wrong. About yourself. About what you're capable of. The question hit harder than she'd expected. Sarah looked away, back at the water. I don't know what I'm capable of. I spent my whole life being told I wasn't good enough. Maybe they were right. Or maybe they were threatened by you. Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact, not gentle. Nothing scares mediocre people more than someone who refuses to settle for mediocrity. That's a generous interpretation? It's an accurate one. He walked back to his horse. Your family wanted you small and quiet because your voice made them uncomfortable. Out here, in this valley, there's space for you to be loud if you want, to take up room, to matter. Sarah mounted Juniper with shaking hands, those words echoing in her head. They rode back toward the ranch house in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, heavier, more charged with things unsaid. The rest of that first week passed in a strange blur of learning and watching. Sarah spent her mornings with Ruth, learning the rhythms of the ranch kitchen, when the hands ate, what they preferred, how to feed 40 people efficiently. Ruth was demanding but patient, correcting Sarah's mistakes with sharp words, but showing her how to do things right. You're not hopeless, Ruth announced on the third day, watching Sarah knead bread dough. Just untrained. There's a difference. The afternoons, Sarah explored the ranch. She watched the hands work the cattle, learned the names of the horses, studied how the whole operation functioned like a single organism. Some of the men ignored her, others nodded politely. A few watched her with open curiosity, clearly wondering what Caleb saw in this plain, odd woman who'd shown up from nowhere. Tom became something like an ally, though he remained a man of few words. He'd appear at her elbow in the stable or the equipment barn, point out something she should know, then disappear again before she could thank him properly. Tom likes you, Ruth said one evening as they prepared dinner. He doesn't bother with people he doesn't respect. He barely talks to me. That's how you know he respects you. If he thought you were useless, he wouldn't waste the breath. Sarah was beginning to understand the strange language of this place, where silence meant more than words and actions counted heavier than promises. Caleb remained a puzzle. He worked from before dawn until after dark, running the ranch with the focused intensity of a general managing an army. At dinner, he'd sit across from Sarah at the long table, usually just the two of them, since the hands ate in the bunkhouse, and they'd talk about neutral things, the weather, the cattle, the upcoming territorial council meeting in Copper Falls. He never pushed her, never demanded anything, never acted like a husband claiming his rights. He treated her more like a business partner in training than a wife, which should have been a relief but somehow made everything more confusing. On the 8th night, after Ruth had gone home to her own cabin and the ranch had settled into sleep, Sarah found Caleb on the front porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky. She brought her own glass. Ruth had started keeping the good whiskey where Sarah could reach it, and sat in the chair beside him without asking permission. Can't sleep? Caleb didn't look at her. Not used to the quiet. Sarah took a drink, welcoming the burn. In my family's house, there was always noise. My mother complaining, my sisters gossiping, my father shouting about something. Here, it's so silent at night I can hear my own thoughts. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure yet. She watched the stars, more visible here than they'd ever been in Black Hollow Ridge. Caleb, can I ask you something? Always. Why haven't you... She struggled for words. We've been here over a week. You treat me like a guest, not a wife. I don't understand what you want from me. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, I want you to choose this. Not because your family forced it, not because you had nowhere else to go, but because you actually want to be here. With me. Building something together. And if I don't? If I decide this was a mistake? Then I'll give you money and a wagon and you can go wherever you want. Start over somewhere new. He finally looked at her. I won't keep you here against your will, Sarah. That's not what I'm after. Most men wouldn't give their wife a choice. I'm not most men. His voice was steady. And I don't want a wife who stays because she has to. I want a partner who stays because she chooses to. That's worth waiting for. Sarah's throat tightened. What if I'm not capable of being what you need? What if you're more capable than you think? He set down his glass. Sarah, I've watched you this week. You learned Ruth's kitchen in days when it takes most people months. You're out in the stables before dawn, asking the hands questions, paying attention to how things work. You're not afraid of hard work or looking stupid while you learn. That's exactly what I need. But I'm not. She stopped, unsure how to finish. Not what? Not beautiful like your sisters? Not charming and sweet? Caleb's voice took on an edge. I've met 100 beautiful, charming women. They smile and agree with everything I say and bore me to death within an hour. You actually have thoughts in your head, opinions, backbone. That's worth more than a pretty face. My family would disagree. Your family, Caleb said, are fools who threw away something valuable because they were too blind to see its worth. Their loss is my gain. The certainty in his voice made something crack in Sarah's chest. That old defense, that protective shell she'd built around herself. She'd spent so long believing she was the problem, the broken piece, the daughter nobody wanted. Hearing someone say the opposite, and mean it, felt dangerous and necessary all at once. I don't know how to do this, she admitted quietly. I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know how to run a household like this. I don't know anything about cattle or ranching or dealing with ranch hands. I'm going to make mistakes. Good. So will I. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Sarah, I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for someone who won't give up when things get hard. Someone who'll tell me the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Someone who'll stand beside me when the whole territory's against us. He paused. Can you do that? She thought about the market in Black Hollow Ridge, about standing alone while 60 people watched, about her mother's laughter and her father's disappointment and the lifetime of learning she wasn't enough. Then she thought about this valley, this strange, fierce man, this chance to become someone new. Yes, Sarah said, I can do that. Something shifted in Caleb's face, not quite a smile, but close. Then we'll figure out the rest together. They sat in silence as the temperature dropped and frost began forming on the porch rails. Eventually, Sarah went inside, but the conversation stayed with her, warming her more than any fire could. The next morning, everything changed. Sarah was helping Ruth prepare breakfast when Tom burst through the kitchen door, his usual calm completely shattered. Where's Caleb? His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. North pasture, checking the fence line. What's wrong? Ruth set down her knife, immediately alert. 3 families just got evicted from their homesteads. Armed men showed up before dawn, gave them an hour to clear out. They're camped at the crossroads with nowhere to go. Sarah's hand stilled on the bread dough. Evicted? On what grounds? Tom looked at her like he'd forgotten she was there. Land company claims they never filed the proper deeds. Says the land belongs to them now. Bought it from the territorial office last month. It's all legal, or legal enough. Legal doesn't mean right. Sarah heard herself say it before thinking. Tom's expression shifted. No, it doesn't. But it is what it is. I need to tell Caleb. He'll want to know before the whole valley finds out. He left as quickly as he'd arrived. Ruth returned to chopping vegetables with more force than necessary, her jaw tight. What land company? Sarah asked. Blackwood Holdings, run by a man named Victor Trent. He's been buying up land all over the territory using loopholes and legal tricks to push out small homesteaders. Then he either sells it to big ranchers or leases it back to the same people at prices they can't afford. That's theft. That's business, according to the territorial court. Ruth's knife hit the cutting board hard. Caleb's been fighting it for 2 years, trying to help families secure their deeds properly, funding legal challenges, but Trent's got money and connections. He always finds a way. Sarah dried her hand slowly. Where's the crossroads? About 5 miles east. Why? Because 3 families with nowhere to go need help. Sarah hung up her apron. And sitting here making breakfast doesn't seem like the right response. Ruth studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled, sharp and approving. Take the smaller wagon. Tom left it hitched by the barn. Load it with bread, cheese, and whatever dried meat you can carry. There's blankets in the storage room. Sarah moved fast, gathering supplies with Ruth's help. By the time Caleb rode in from the north pasture, she had the wagon loaded and was climbing onto the driver's seat. He took in the scene instantly. The loaded wagon, Sarah's determined face, Tom standing nearby with his arms crossed. "What are you doing?" Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. "Helping." Sarah picked up the reins. "Tom told us about the evictions. Those families need food and shelter. I'm bringing it to them." "Sarah, this situation is complicated. Trent's operation is— I don't care about Trent's operation. I care about 3 families sleeping in the cold because of legal theft." She met his eyes directly. "You said you wanted someone who'd stand beside you when things got hard. This seems hard." Caleb stared at her. Then, slowly, that almost smile crossed his face. "Tom, saddle 3 more horses. Get Mason and Holt. We're all going." "You don't have to—" Sarah started. "You're right. I don't." Caleb swung back onto his horse. "But you're my wife, heading into a situation that might turn ugly. So yes, I absolutely do. Now drive that wagon before I change my mind about letting you go at all." Sarah clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward. Behind her, she heard Tom's low chuckle and Caleb's muttered response she couldn't quite catch. The crossroads was exactly what Tom had described. 3 families huddled around a pitiful fire, their belongings piled on 2 wagons, children crying from cold and confusion. The adults looked hollow, defeated, like people who'd just watched their entire lives get reduced to whatever they could carry. Sarah pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down before anyone could tell her it wasn't safe. A woman looked up, maybe 30, with a baby on her hip and 2 other children clinging to her skirts. "Who are you?" The woman's voice was wary. "Sarah Mercer. My husband owns the ranch in the valley. We brought food and blankets." She started unloading the wagon. "Have you eaten today?" "We had some bread this morning, before they—" The woman's voice broke. "Before they threw us out of our house." Caleb rode up with Tom and the other hands, dismounting quietly. He didn't take over or make speeches. He just started helping Sarah unload, handing out blankets to shivering children, distributing food to grateful adults. An older man approached, weathered and angry, with hands that looked like they'd worked hard all their life. "You Caleb Mercer?" "I am." "Name's Jacob Carson. This is my son's family, and the Hayes family, and the Drummonds. We all got evicted this morning. Same company, same trick. They're saying we never had proper title." "Did you file your deeds?" Caleb asked. "Of course we did. 3 years ago, at the territorial office. Had the papers and everything." Jacob's face twisted. "But this morning they're saying those deeds were never valid, that the office made a mistake and the land was already promised to Blackwood Holdings. It's all lies, but they got armed men and legal papers, and we got nothing." Sarah watched her husband's face go hard. "Trent? That's the name, yeah, Victor Trent. He offered to let us stay on our own land if we'd pay him rent, 3 times what any reasonable lease would cost. When we said we couldn't afford it, his men gave us an hour to pack and get out." Jacob spit into the dirt. "Legal robbery is what it is." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Tom, ride back to the ranch. Get the 2 empty cabins ready, the ones near the south field. These families are staying with us until we figure this out." Tom nodded and rode off without a word. Jacob stared. "You serious?" "I don't joke about shelter." Caleb turned to the gathered families. "You'll work for your keep. We've got plenty that needs doing before winter. But you'll be safe, fed, and warm while we challenge this eviction properly. If Trent wants these families homeless, he'll have to go through me first." The relief on those faces was painful to watch. Sarah felt something expand in her chest. Pride, maybe, or recognition. This was what Caleb had meant. This was the kind of partner he'd wanted, not someone who'd stay silent while injustice happened, someone who'd stand up. A woman from one of the other families approached Sarah, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. We didn't know where to go. We thought—" "You don't have to explain." Sarah squeezed the woman's hand. "Come on, let's get your children warmer before they catch cold." As they organized the families and prepared to move them to the Mercer Ranch, Sarah caught Caleb watching her. He didn't say anything, just gave her a slight nod that felt like more than words could have carried. That evening, with 3 families settled into ranch cabins and Ruth organizing a massive dinner to feed everyone, Caleb found Sarah on the porch again. "You surprised me today," he said without preamble. "How?" "I told you the situation was complicated. Most people would have waited, thought it through, asked more questions. You just loaded a wagon and went." He leaned against the porch rail. "That was either very brave or very stupid. Which do you think it was?" Both. But his voice was warm. Sarah, what you did today, standing up for those families without hesitation, that's exactly what I hoped for when I asked you to marry me. But I didn't expect it to happen so fast. What did you expect? Honestly, I thought you'd need months to trust me, months to feel comfortable enough to speak your mind, to act on your instincts. I thought I'd have to slowly convince you that your voice mattered here. He shook his head. But you just dove right in. Sarah thought about that. Maybe I was tired of being careful, tired of second-guessing everything, worried about saying the wrong thing or making people uncomfortable. You said there was space here for me to be loud. I'm testing whether you meant it. I meant it. Caleb's eyes were serious. But Sarah, you need to understand something. What happened today, helping those families, that's going to put us on Trent's radar. He doesn't like interference, and he's got the money and connections to make life very difficult for people who cross him. Are you saying we should have left them at the crossroads? No, I'm saying there will be consequences for both of us, and I need to know you're ready for that. Sarah looked out at the valley, at the lights in the cabins where 3 displaced families were settling in for their first safe night in days. She thought about Caleb's words on the porch the night before, about choosing this life instead of just accepting it. I'm ready, she said. And for the first time since arriving in the valley, she meant it completely. The consequences arrived faster than Sarah had expected. 3 days after the displaced families moved on to Mercerland, a rider appeared at dawn carrying an official-looking envelope sealed with black wax. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as Caleb took it, his face going stone cold as he read whatever was inside. He found her an hour later in the stable, where she'd been helping one of the Carson boys learn to properly brush down a horse. The boy, Daniel, maybe 10 years old, had been skittish and quiet since the eviction, but he'd started to relax around the animals. Sarah, Caleb's voice was tight. I need to talk to you. Alone. Daniel took the brush and scurried off without being told. Sarah followed Caleb out behind the stable, where the morning sun hadn't yet burned off the frost. What's wrong? He handed her the letter. It was written in precise legal language that took her a moment to parse, but the meaning was clear enough. Victor Trent's company was filing a formal complaint with the Territorial Council, claiming that Caleb Mercer was harboring squatters and interfering with legitimate business operations. The letter demanded the immediate removal of the Carson, Hayes, and Drummond families, plus compensation for damages and lost revenue. How much compensation? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the cold fear spreading through her chest. $5,000. She looked up sharply. That's insane. What damages? What lost revenue? Doesn't matter, it's not about the money. Trent has plenty. It's about making an example. Caleb took the letter back, refolding it with controlled precision. He wants everyone in the territory to know what happens when you cross Blackwood Holdings. And he's starting with me because I sit on the Territorial Council, and I've been the loudest voice against his land grabs. So what do we do? We? Caleb's eyes were sharp. Sarah, this isn't your fight. I made the decision to shelter those families. I'll handle the consequences. Something hot flared in her chest. You said you wanted a partner, someone who'd stand beside you when things got hard. Was that a lie? No, but then don't shut me out the first time it actually matters. She stepped closer, holding his gaze. What do we do? Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face, that careful control cracking just slightly to show the man underneath. We fight. But Sarah, you need to understand what that means. Trent's not just some corrupt businessman. He's connected to the territorial governor, half the judges, and most of the law enforcement in 3 counties. Fighting him means going up against the entire system. Then we go up against the system. It could cost us everything. The ranch, our reputation, maybe worse. Trent's been known to use violence when legal methods fail. Armed men, mysterious fires, accidents that aren't really accidents. His voice was flat, factual. I won't lie to you about the danger. Sarah thought about those 3 families, about the hollow look in Jacob Carson's eyes when his home was stolen. She thought about the old man in the Black Hollow Ridge Market, about standing alone while everyone else stayed silent. If we send those families away, where do they go? What happens to them? I don't know. Yes, you do. Sarah's voice was hard. They end up on another crossroads somewhere, or in a city slum, or dead from exposure before winter's over. You know it, and I know it. So what's the alternative? We just let Trent destroy people's lives because fighting back is inconvenient? Caleb's jaw tightened. It's not about convenience, it's about keeping you safe. I didn't ask to be kept safe. I asked to matter. There's a difference. She reached out, gripping his arm. Caleb, my whole life I watched people choose comfort over doing what's right. My family, the people in that market, everyone. They all had excuses, and every time good people suffered because nobody was willing to pay the cost of standing up. I'm done being that person. He covered her hand with his skin rough and warm. You're sure? I'm terrified, but I'm sure. Something that might have been relief crossed his face. All right then, we fight. The next week became a blur of activity and planning. Caleb spent hours with the displaced families, going through every piece of documentation they had. Original deeds, purchase receipts, correspondence with the Territorial Land Office. Sarah watched him work, saw the lawyer underneath the rancher, the strategic mind that had built an empire from nothing. Look at this, he said one evening, spreading papers across the dining table. Sarah, Tom, and Jacob Carson leaned in to study the documents. All three families filed their deeds on the same day 3 years ago. Same clerk processed them. Now that clerk's dead, died 6 months ago in what was ruled an accidental fall from a horse. Convenient timing, Tom muttered. Very convenient. And the current clerk claims there's no record of these deeds in the official register. Says they must have been misfiled or lost. Caleb tapped one of the papers. But look at this notation here. It's a filing number, stamped and signed. If these were misfiled, this number would still exist somewhere in the system. Jacob shook his head. We already tried arguing that. The Territorial Office said the stamp must have been a mistake. Said sometimes clerks stamp documents they haven't actually processed yet. That's not how it works. Sarah heard herself speak before thinking. 3 men turned to look at her. I mean, my father handled some land transactions. Small ones, but he always complained about how careful the Territorial Office was. Multiple copies, verification signatures, cross-references. They don't just stamp things randomly. Caleb's eyes lit up. She's right. And if these filing numbers are legitimate, there should be duplicate records. The Territorial Office keeps 3 copies of every deed, one for the landowner, one for the main register, and one for the Territorial Archive in the capital. The capital's 2 weeks' ride from here, Tom pointed out. Then someone needs to make that ride. Caleb looked at Jacob. You willing to go? Check the archive, see if your original deeds are still on file? Jacob's weathered face was skeptical. Even if they are, what's to stop Trent from paying someone to make those disappear too? Nothing, but if we can prove the deeds existed and were properly filed, we can take that evidence to the territorial court, make a public record of the fraud before Trent can bury it completely. Caleb started gathering the documents. It's not much, but it's a start. I'll go with him. Sarah's voice cut through the room. All 3 men stared at her. Absolutely not, Caleb said immediately. Why not? You need someone who can read legal documents, who knows what to look for. Jacob can verify the specifics about his land, but he needs someone who understands the filing system. Sarah crossed her arms. Unless you don't think I'm capable. It's not about capability, it's about safety. 2 weeks on the road through rough country, with Trent probably watching our every move. Which is exactly why you should send me instead of yourself. Trent's watching you because you're on the Territorial Council, because you're the visible threat. But I'm just the new wife, nobody important. We're less likely to draw attention. Tom made a sound that might have been a chuckle quickly disguised as a cough. Caleb shot him a dark look. Sarah, I'm not sending you into potential danger just because you're not sending me anywhere. I'm choosing to go. She leaned forward on the table. Caleb, you said this was about partnership, about letting me stand beside you. You can't say that and then lock me in the house the moment things get difficult. There's a difference between standing beside me and riding 2 weeks into hostile territory. Is there? Because it seems like you want a partner who agrees with you and stays safely out of the way. That's not a partner. That's a decoration. Her voice sharpened. Make up your mind what you actually want. The room went quiet. Jacob looked uncomfortable. Tom studied the ceiling like it contained secrets. Caleb's face was unreadable. Finally, he said, Tom, Jacob, give us a minute. They left quickly. Sarah stayed planted where she was, chin raised, ready for whatever argument came next. Instead, Caleb leaned against the table, suddenly looking exhausted. You don't fight fair. Neither does Trent. That's not... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. Sarah, I'm trying to protect you. I know, and I appreciate it. But I don't need protection. I need purpose. She softened her voice slightly. Caleb, I spent 24 years being told to stay quiet, stay small, stay out of the way. I came here because you said I could be different, so let me be different. Let me help. If something happens to you, then that's on me. But sitting here while everyone else risks themselves, that's worse than any danger on the road. At least let me fail on my own terms. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed, short and sharp, but genuine. You're going to make my life very difficult, aren't you? Probably. And you're not going to back down on this. No. Caleb pushed away from the table. Fine. You and Jacob leave in 3 days. That gives me time to arrange supplies and figure out the safest route. Tom goes with you as protection. And you follow his instructions, no arguments. Agreed? Agreed. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. I'm going to regret this. Maybe, but you'd regret the alternative more. He looked at her then, really looked at her, with something in his eyes she couldn't quite name. You're not what I expected. Is that good or bad? I'm still deciding. But there was warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. The 3 days passed in frantic preparation. Tom mapped out a route that avoided the main roads, sticking to less traveled paths where they'd be harder to track. Ruth packed enough food to feed a small army, muttering the entire time about foolish men and stubborn women. The displaced families watched the preparations with a mixture of hope and fear. On the morning of departure, Sarah was finishing loading her saddlebag when she heard horses approaching fast. She turned to see 5 riders cresting the ridge, moving with the kind of purposeful speed that meant trouble. Caleb, she called, already moving toward the house. He emerged onto the porch, Tom right behind him. The riders slowed as they entered the yard, spreading out in a loose semicircle. They wore the same dark clothes, the same hard expressions, the same guns on their hips. The man in the center dismounted. Tall, thin, dressed too well for ranch work. He had the kind of face that looked friendly until you noticed his eyes were flat and cold. Caleb Mercer. His voice was smooth, educated. I'm Marcus Webb, legal representative for Blackwood Holdings. Mr. Trent sent me to discuss the situation regarding the squatters currently residing on your property. They're not squatters, they're workers. And this is private property, so you can turn around and leave. Caleb's voice was hard but controlled. Webb smiled. Actually, we have every legal right to be here. You see, when you provided shelter to individuals actively evading a legitimate eviction order, you became party to their legal troubles. That makes you subject to investigation and, if necessary, enforcement actions. Enforcement actions. Caleb descended the porch steps slowly. That's a fancy way of saying intimidation. It's a fancy way of saying we protect our business interests. Mr. Trent is a reasonable man. He's willing to settle this matter quietly. All you need to do is remove those families from your land and pay the compensation outlined in our letter, $5,000, and this all goes away. And if I refuse? Webb's smile widened. Then things become complicated. Legal battles are expensive, Mr. Mercer, even for a man of your means. And they tend to attract attention to every aspect of your operation. Water rights, grazing permits, worker contracts. Amazing how many small violations can be found when someone looks hard enough. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists. This was exactly what Caleb had warned about, the system itself being used as a weapon. She started to step forward, but Tom's hand caught her arm, holding her back. I see Trent's moved beyond land theft into outright extortion, Caleb said. Does the territorial governor know his business partner operates this way? Something flickered in Webb's expression. Careful, Mercer. Accusations like that can be dangerous, especially when you're already on thin ice. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Webb remounted his horse. You have 1 week to comply with our demands. After that, we'll be forced to take more direct action. I trust you'll make the right choice. He wheeled his horse around, his men following, and they rode off at the same purposeful pace they'd arrived. Sarah watched them disappear over the ridge, her heart hammering against her ribs. Well, Tom said quietly. That wasn't subtle. Caleb's face was stone. It wasn't meant to be. They're letting us know exactly what we're up against. He turned to Sarah. You still want to make that ride to the Capitol? More than ever. Then you leave tonight, not in 3 days. Tonight. If Webb's here making threats, it means Trent knows we're planning something. We can't give him time to get ahead of us. Jacob emerged from one of the cabins, having watched the whole confrontation. They're going to come after us, aren't they? Use us to hurt you. Probably. Caleb's honesty was brutal, which is why we need to move fast. Get the proof we need before Trent can destroy it. That night, under a sliver of moon, Sarah rode out with Tom and Jacob. They moved quietly, avoiding the main roads, sticking to game trails and creek beds. Sarah's whole body was tense, expecting armed men to appear from the darkness at any moment. But the night stayed quiet, and by dawn they were miles from the ranch, deep in territory that belonged to nobody and everybody. They traveled hard for 4 days, stopping only when the horses needed rest. Tom proved to be as efficient on the trail as he was on the ranch, finding water, choosing campsites, keeping watch while the others slept. Jacob was quieter, the weight of his family's situation pressing down on him. On the 5th night, camped beside a creek, Sarah sat beside Jacob while Tom checked the horses. You didn't have to do this, Jacob said quietly. Risk yourself for people you barely know. Yes, I did. Sarah poked at the fire with a stick. If I didn't, I'd be just like everyone else who stood by and watched when your family needed help. Most people would say that's the smart choice. Not getting involved, keeping yourself safe. Most people are cowards. The words came out harsher than she'd intended. Sorry, that's not... I don't mean you're a coward. You fought for your land. But everyone else? All the neighbors who watched you get evicted and did nothing? They're cowards. Jacob was quiet for a moment. Your husband's a good man. A lot of rich ranchers would have turned us away, said it wasn't their problem. Caleb's not like other rich ranchers. Sarah thought about him standing on the porch, facing down Webb's threats without flinching. He actually believes in something besides money. You believe in something too. Jacob met her eyes. That's why you're here. Not many women would make this ride. Not many women get the chance. Most men won't let them. Your husband let you. Sarah thought about that argument in the dining room, about Caleb's reluctant agreement. He didn't want to, but he respected me enough to let me choose. That's new for me. Tom returned from checking the horses, and the conversation died. They slept in shifts, and at dawn they rode again. The capital appeared on the horizon on the 8th day, a sprawling frontier town that thought it was a city, with buildings 3 stories tall and streets actually paved in the center. It was the largest place Sarah had ever seen, and she tried not to gawk like a country fool. The Territorial Archive was a stone building near the center of town, imposing and official. Sarah dismounted, her legs stiff from 8 days in the saddle, and followed Jacob and Tom inside. The clerk was a small man with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink stains on his fingers. He looked up from his desk with the expression of someone who'd been interrupted from something important. Help you? We need to access deed records, Jacob said, from 3 years ago filed in Black Hollow Ridge territory. The clerk's expression didn't change. Name and filing number. Jacob provided both. The clerk disappeared into the back room and they waited in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When he returned, he was carrying nothing. Sarah's heart sank. No record, the clerk said flatly. Nothing under that name or filing number. You sure you have the right information? I'm sure. Jacob's voice was tight. Those deeds were filed 3 years ago, properly stamped and signed. The filing number has to be in your system. Sir, I'm looking at the system. There's nothing here. The clerk adjusted his spectacles. Maybe the deeds were never actually filed. Maybe the clerk in Black Hollow Ridge made a mistake. That's not possible, Sarah said. Those stamps don't get applied by mistake. There's a process. The clerk looked at her like she was a dog that had suddenly started talking. And you are? Someone who understands how this system works. She moved closer to the desk. Those filing numbers exist, which means there should be duplicate records here, unless someone removed them. The clerk's face tightened. Are you accusing this office of impropriety? I'm saying that 3 families lost their land because deeds mysteriously vanished from official records. That's either incompetence or corruption. Which is it? Sarah, Tom warned quietly. But Sarah wasn't done. Is there a supervisor I can speak to? Someone who can explain how 3 properly filed deeds just disappeared? The supervisor is out of the territory, won't be back for 2 weeks. The clerk stood, making it clear the conversation was over. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. They left the building in defeat. Outside, in the harsh afternoon sun, Jacob looked like someone had punched him in the gut. They got here first, he said. Trent got here first. Those records are gone. Maybe. Sarah stared back at the archive building. Or maybe there's another copy somewhere. Tom, where else would deed records be stored? County offices keep local copies. But if the territorial archive has nothing, the local office won't either. They're all connected. Sarah thought hard, trying to remember her father's complaints about land transactions. What about the surveyor's office? Don't they keep maps and boundary records? Those would reference the original deeds. Tom's eyes sharpened. They might. Survey records are separate from deed records. Different office, different clerks. It's worth trying. The surveyor's office was smaller, dustier, and staffed by an older man who looked like he'd been mapping this territory since before Sarah was born. He listened to their request without comment, then disappeared into a back room filled with rolled maps and bound ledgers. He was gone long enough that Sarah started to lose hope again. Then he returned carrying a large ledger bound in cracked leather, along with several rolled maps. Black Hollow Ridge territory, 3 years back. He set everything on a table and opened the ledger. What parcels? Jacob gave the locations. The surveyor ran his finger down columns of notations, stopping 3 times to mark pages with slips of paper. Here. He tapped one entry. Carson Homestead, surveyed and registered 3 years ago, August 15th. Cross-referenced with territorial deed number, he read off the same filing number Jacob had provided. Sarah felt like she could breathe again. Can we get copies of these records? The surveyor looked at her over his spectacles. Cost you $2 per parcel for certified copies. We'll take all 3. While the surveyor prepared the documents, Tom pulled Sarah aside. This proves the deeds existed and were properly filed, but it doesn't prove Trent stole them. No, but it proves someone's lying about these deeds never being filed in the first place. That's enough to force an investigation. Sarah watched the surveyor work with careful precision. It's not everything we need, but it's something. They left the surveyor's office with certified copies tucked safely into Jacob's saddlebag. It wasn't the smoking gun they'd hoped for, but it was evidence that couldn't be easily dismissed. We need to get this back to Caleb, Tom said, before Trent figures out what we found. They rode out of the capital that evening, pushing the horses hard. Sarah could feel the urgency now. They had something valuable, and that made them targets. On the 3rd night of the return journey, her instincts proved right. They'd made camp in a small canyon, thinking the high walls would provide cover. Sarah woke to Tom's hand over her mouth and his urgent whisper in her ear. Riders, coming this way. 4, maybe 5. Get up slow and don't make noise. Her heart hammered as she rose, gathering her bedroll with shaking hands. Jacob was already awake, his face pale in the moonlight. They saddled the horses as quietly as possible, but in the canyon's silence, every sound seemed magnified. They heard the riders before they saw them, horses moving at a careful walk, men speaking in low voices. This way. Tom saw tracks leading into this canyon. Sarah's blood went cold. They knew Tom's name. This wasn't random. They'd been followed, tracked, hunted. Tom gestured sharply toward a narrow trail that led up the canyon wall. It was steep, dangerous in the dark, but it was their only option. They led the horses up single file, trying to move silently over loose rock. Behind them, voices echoed off the canyon walls. Fresh tracks. They're here somewhere. Spread out, check the side trails. Sarah's horse stumbled on loose gravel, the sound impossibly loud. Below, someone shouted, "There, up the ridge!" Tom swore and swung onto his horse. "Ride! Don't stop until you hit the creek bed." They crashed through the darkness, branches whipping at Sarah's face. The horses scrambling for purchase on the steep terrain. Behind them she could hear pursuit, men shouting, horses crashing through brush. A gunshot cracked through the night. Sarah flattened against her horse's neck, terror racing through her veins. Another shot, then another. But they were shooting blind in the darkness, and the steep terrain worked against pursuit. They burst out of the canyon into open country, the horses running flat out now. Sarah clung to her saddle, every muscle screaming, adrenaline drowning out everything except the need to move, to survive, to get away. They rode hard for an hour before Tom finally slowed, listening intently. Behind them, the night was quiet. Either they'd lost their pursuers, or the men had given up the chase in the darkness. "Everyone all right?" Tom's voice was rough. "Yes," Sarah gasped. Jacob just nodded, too winded to speak. "They'll pick up our trail at dawn. We need to keep moving, put as much distance as we can before sunrise." Tom turned his horse. "And we need to get off the main paths entirely. They knew where to find us, which means they've been tracking us since the capital." "How?" Sarah asked. "Someone at the surveyor's office, probably, sent word ahead that we'd found something." Tom's face was grim. "Trent's got people everywhere." They rode through the rest of the night and into the next day, sticking to creek beds and game trails, doubling back on their own tracks, doing everything Tom could think of to throw off pursuit. By the time the Mercer Valley came into view, Sarah was so exhausted she could barely sit upright in the saddle. But they'd made it, and they still had the documents. Caleb met them in the yard, his face drawn with worry that turned to relief when he saw them. He helped Sarah down from her horse, and she nearly collapsed against him, her legs refusing to hold her weight. "You're hurt," he said sharply, seeing the cuts on her face from branches. "No, just tired, and we were shot at." The words came out flat, matter of fact, and she saw his face go white. "What happened?" Tom gave a quick report while Ruth appeared with water and food, fussing over all three of them. Jacob handed Caleb the saddlebag with the precious documents, and Caleb studied them in the fading evening light. "This is good," he said finally. "Not everything we need, but it's a start. It proves the deeds existed, that they were properly filed. That gives us grounds to demand a full investigation. They tried to stop us from bringing it back," Sarah said. "Trent's men, I think. They knew where we were, knew what we'd found." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then we move fast. I'm taking these to the Territorial Council meeting tomorrow, making everything public before Trent can bury it again." "He'll retaliate," Tom warned. "Let him." Caleb looked at the exhausted, battered group in front of him. "We've got the evidence. We've got the truth. And now we've got witnesses to attempted murder. Trent may have money and connections, but he's not invincible. Not if we're willing to fight." Sarah, standing beside him in the twilight with dirt on her clothes and blood on her face, felt something solid settle in her chest. This was what Caleb had meant. This was what partnership looked like. Not pretty, not safe, but real. Built on trust and shared purpose and the willingness to risk everything for what was right. "So we fight," she said. "So we fight," Caleb agreed. And in the valley below, as lights began appearing in windows and the ranch settled into evening, Sarah finally understood what home could mean. Not a place where you were tolerated, but a place where you were needed, where your voice mattered, where standing up had consequences, but silence had worse ones. She'd ridden into danger and come back alive. She'd found proof that could topple a corrupt empire, and she'd done it not despite who she was, but because of it. For the first time in her life, Sarah Whitmore Mercer felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The Territorial Council met in Copper Falls, a day's hard ride from the valley. Caleb left before dawn with the surveyor's documents secured in a leather case, Tom and two other ranch hands riding with him as protection. Sarah watched them disappear into the gray morning light, her stomach twisted into knots. "He'll be fine," Ruth said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. Caleb's been dealing with territorial politics for years. He knows how to handle men like Trent. Does he know how to handle men who send armed riders to kill people in the middle of the night? Sarah took the coffee, grateful for the warmth. Her hands were still shaking, had been shaking since they'd fled that canyon 3 nights ago. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "No, that's new territory for all of us." The day crawled past. Sarah tried to work, helping Ruth in the kitchen, checking on the displaced families, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. But every sound made her jump. Every rider approaching the ranch made her heart race. By late afternoon, she was pacing the front porch like a caged animal when she saw dust rising on the eastern road. Multiple riders, moving fast. Sarah's hand went automatically to the rifle Tom had insisted she keep close. She'd never shot anything more dangerous than a fox in a henhouse, but the weight of the weapon was reassuring. The riders resolved into Caleb and his men, and Sarah's breath rushed out in relief. But as they got closer, she saw Caleb's face was dark with barely contained rage. He dismounted hard, nearly throwing the reins at one of the hands. "Get the families together. Main house. Now!" Sarah followed him inside. What happened? Everything and nothing. He poured himself whiskey with shaking hands, the first time she'd seen him anything less than completely controlled. The council heard the evidence, saw the surveyor's documents, agreed it was compelling proof that the deeds had been properly filed. That's good, isn't it? You'd think so. Caleb downed the whiskey in one gulp. Then Victor Trent stood up. Yes, he was there personally, wanted to witness my humiliation, and presented his own documents. Turns out he's got signed affidavits from 3 territorial office clerks swearing the Carson, Hayes, and Drummond deeds were never properly filed. Claims the surveyor's records are outdated and inaccurate, and he's got a territorial judge backing his version of events. Sarah felt cold. They're all lying. Of course they're lying. Everyone in that room knew they were lying. But Trent's got enough legal cover that the council can't just override him without risking their own positions. Caleb poured another whiskey. They voted to form an investigative committee, said they'd review all the evidence and issue a ruling in 60 days. 60 days? Which gives Trent 60 days to make those families' lives hell, to pressure them into giving up, to make examples out of anyone who stands against him. He turned to face her, and he made very clear I'm at the top of that list. Before Sarah could respond, Tom appeared in the doorway. Families are gathered. You want to tell them now? Caleb nodded grimly and headed for the main room. Sarah followed, dreading what came next. Jacob Carson stood with his wife Ellen and their 3 children. The Hayes family, William, his pregnant wife Martha, and their 2 daughters, clustered together near the fireplace. The Drummonds, an older couple named Henry and Susanna, held hands tightly. They all looked at Caleb with desperate hope that Sarah knew was about to be crushed. I presented the evidence to the Territorial Council today, Caleb began, his voice carefully steady. The surveyor's documents prove your deeds were properly filed 3 years ago. But Trent came prepared with his own documents, affidavits, and judicial rulings that contradict ours. The council has ordered an investigation that will take 60 days. 60 days, Jacob repeated hollowly. And then what? Then they rule on who has legitimate claim to the land. If they rule in your favor, Trent's eviction orders are invalid and you can return home. If they rule against you... Caleb didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ellen Carson's face crumpled. Martha Hayes started crying silently, one hand on her pregnant belly. Henry Drummond just looked old and defeated. So we wait, William Hayes said bitterly. We sit here for 2 months while that bastard destroys everything we built, and then we hope some politicians decide to do the right thing. That's the plan? No. Sarah heard herself speak before thinking. All eyes turned to her. That's not the plan. Caleb shot her a warning look, but she ignored it. Trent's counting on you giving up. He's counting on 60 days being long enough for you to lose hope, to accept defeat, to just disappear quietly. That's how he's always won, by making the fight too hard, too long, too expensive for ordinary people to sustain. So what do you suggest? Jacob's voice was sharp with pain. We can't fight a man with that much money and power. We just watched the Territorial Council bow to him like he was royalty. We don't fight him the way he expects us to. Sarah looked at Caleb. He's using the legal system as a weapon because it's slow and expensive and designed to favor people like him. But there are other weapons. Such as? Caleb's voice was neutral, but she could see calculation in his eyes. Public pressure, shame, exposure. Sarah's mind was racing now, pieces clicking together. Trent operates in shadows, using legal technicalities and bought officials. What if we dragged everything into the light, made it impossible for him to hide behind paperwork and affidavits? Tom leaned against the doorframe. You're talking about making this public, beyond just the council. I'm talking about making it impossible to ignore. Every newspaper in the territory, every town hall meeting, every place where people gather and talk. We tell this story. How 3 families had their homes stolen through legal fraud. How a wealthy company is using corruption to destroy honest settlers. We make Trent and everyone protecting him defend their actions in public, not just in closed council meetings. That'll make him furious, Caleb said quietly. Right now he's trying to crush us quietly. You're talking about declaring open war. He already declared war when he sent armed men after us in that canyon. Sarah's voice was hard. The only question is whether we're going to fight back or just wait for him to destroy us piece by piece. The room was silent. Then Jacob spoke, his voice rough. My family's already lost everything. Our home, our land, our livelihood. If there's even a chance of getting it back, I'll take it. I don't care how angry it makes Trent. Same here, William said. I've got a baby coming in 3 months. I'm not raising my child in fear because some rich man decided our land was worth stealing. Henry Drummond nodded slowly. We're old. We've seen enough corruption and cowardice to last a lifetime. If we're going down, at least let it mean something. Caleb looked at Sarah for a long moment, something complicated passing across his face. Then he turned back to the families. All right, if we're doing this, we do it smart. Sarah's right about public pressure. It's the one weapon Trent can't completely control. But it also means every move we make has to be calculated. We document everything. We verify every fact. We make our case so airtight that even people who hate us can't dispute the truth. How? Ellen Carson's voice was shaky but determined. How do we fight someone who owns judges and clerks and politicians? We start by finding people Trent doesn't own. Journalists who actually care about truth. Politicians who aren't in his pocket. Common people who are tired of watching powerful men steal from the weak. Caleb's voice took on that strategic edge Sarah was learning to recognize. And we start locally, here in the valley. Every ranch, every town, every person who's ever been hurt by Blackwood Holdings. We build a coalition. That'll take time, Tom pointed out. We've got 60 days. Let's use them. Caleb looked at Sarah again. You started this. You want to see it through? Yes. Then tomorrow, we start making visits. Every neighboring ranch, every settlement within 2 days' ride. We tell this story until everyone in the territory knows what Trent is. He straightened, and Sarah could see the leader underneath the rancher. Ruth, we're going to need supplies for travel. Tom, I want a list of every person in this territory who's had problems with Blackwood Holdings. And someone find me the nearest newspaper editor who's not on Trent's payroll. The room erupted into activity. Plans were made, tasks assigned, hope kindled from desperation. Sarah watched families that had been defeated an hour ago transform into people with purpose again. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, she found Caleb on the porch with his whiskey and his thoughts. You know this could fail, he said without preamble. Public opinion doesn't mean much when the law is against you. We could do everything right and still lose. I know. Sarah sat beside him. But at least we'll lose fighting. That's better than giving up. Is it? Because fighting means those families stay in danger longer, means more chances for Trent to hurt people. If they just left, found new land somewhere else, started over, they'd be safer. They'd also spend the rest of their lives running, looking over their shoulders, wondering when the next Victor Trent would appear and take everything again. Sarah looked at him. You know I'm right. I know you're stubborn. But there was no heat in it. Sarah, what you said today about public pressure, that was smart. Strategic. Where'd that come from? She thought about it. My father used to complain about a competitor who was spreading rumors about our family business. He said facts didn't matter, only perception. Reputation could destroy a business faster than bankruptcy. She paused. I always hated that he was right. But now I'm thinking maybe we can use the same principle. Trent's built his empire on the perception that he's untouchable. What if we change that perception? Caleb studied her in the darkness. You're not what I expected when I sent that proposal. You keep saying that. What did you expect? Someone brave, yes. Someone principled. But I thought it would take time for you to find your voice here, to trust yourself enough to speak up. He set down his glass. Instead, you showed up and immediately started challenging everything, helping displaced families, riding into danger, proposing strategy. It's like you were just waiting for permission to be yourself. Maybe I was. Sarah's throat tightened. My whole life I was told my voice didn't matter, that my thoughts were wrong, my instincts were bad, my way of seeing the world was somehow broken. After a while, you start believing it, start second-guessing everything. But here, when I speak up, you actually listen. So yes, Maybe I was waiting for permission, or maybe I was waiting for someone who wouldn't punish me for being honest. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then, I'm glad you're here. I know I've said it before, but I mean it more now. You make me better, sharper. You see angles I miss, push when I'm too cautious. We're stronger together than either of us would be alone. Something warm bloomed in Sarah's chest. Not quite love yet, but the foundation of it. Trust, respect, partnership. The kind of relationship she'd never believed was possible. Don't get sentimental on me, she said, trying to lighten the moment. We've still got a fight ahead. A fight we might lose. But we'll lose together. That counts for something. Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness, calloused and warm. They sat in silence as the valley settled into sleep around them, two stubborn people preparing for war. The next morning began their campaign. Caleb and Sarah rode out with Tom and Jacob, visiting neighboring ranches and settlements. Some doors opened wide with sympathy and offers of help. Others closed quickly, fear of Trent's retaliation stronger than moral conviction. At the Bennett Ranch, a sprawling cattle operation almost as large as Caleb's, they found their first real ally. Robert Bennett was a weathered man in his 60s who listened to their story with a face like carved granite. I've tangled with Blackwood Holdings before, he said finally. 3 years back, they tried to claim water rights to a creek running through my land. Said they'd bought the rights from the territorial office, had all the paperwork. Took me 6 months and $5,000 in legal fees to prove they'd forged the documents. Did you report the fraud? Caleb asked. To who? The same territorial office that was probably in on it? Bennett's laugh was bitter. I won my case and learned to watch my back. That's all you can do against men like Trent. Or we could make it impossible for him to operate this way. Sarah leaned forward. If enough of us stand together, share our stories publicly, demand real investigations. Girl, I admire your optimism, but you're talking about going up against the entire system. Trent's not just one corrupt businessman. He's connected to dozens of others just like him. You expose him, you expose them all. That makes a lot of powerful people very nervous. Good, Sarah said flatly. They should be nervous. They should be terrified that ordinary people might finally stand up and demand honesty. Bennett studied her with new interest. You always this fierce? Only when someone tries to steal people's homes. A slow smile crossed Bennett's weathered face. All right, I'm in. I'll make a formal statement about my experience with Blackwood Holdings. Put it in writing, sign it, let you use it however you need, and I'll talk to some of the other ranchers. Not all of them will help. Too many are scared or already in Trent's pocket, but a few might find their backbone. They left the Bennett Ranch with their first victory, small but significant. Over the next week, they collected 4 more sworn statements from people Trent had wronged. A shopkeeper in Copper Falls who'd been forced to sell his business at half value. A widow whose late husband's mining claim had been stolen through legal manipulation. A freight company owner who'd been pushed out of business by Blackwood subsidiaries. Each story followed the same pattern. Legal technicalities, forged or disappeared documents, officials who looked the other way, victims too poor or scared to fight back effectively. Sarah documented everything, writing down testimonies in careful detail. She'd never thought of herself as a writer, but the words came easily when they were true, when they mattered. On the 9th day of their campaign, they found the journalist. His name was Daniel Reeves, and he ran a small weekly newspaper in Silver Creek called the Territorial Truth. He was young, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and the kind of skeptical expression that came from watching too many people lie. I've heard about the Carson evictions, he said, sitting across from them in his cramped office. Heard Caleb Mercer was making noise at the council meeting. What I want to know is why I should care. Because it's not just the Carsons, Sarah said, pushing forward the stack of written testimonies they'd collected. It's a pattern. Blackwood Holdings has been stealing land and businesses throughout the territory for years, using legal fraud and corruption. We have documented proof. Reeves flipped through the pages, his expression unchanging. Then he set them down. You know what happens to journalists who go after powerful men? They lose advertisers. They get sued for libel. Sometimes they get worse. He met Sarah's eyes. I've got a wife and a child on the way. I can't afford to make enemies of people like Victor Trent. Can you afford to look your child in the eye someday and explain why you stayed silent when you could have spoken truth? Sarah's voice was hard. These families lost everything. More families will lose everything unless someone with a platform tells their story. If you won't do it because it's right, do it because it's the kind of story people will actually read. Corruption, theft, ordinary people fighting back, that sells newspapers. Something flickered in Reeves's expression. You're asking me to bet my livelihood on your word that these testimonies are accurate. No, I'm asking you to investigate, verify everything we've given you. Talk to these people yourself. Then decide whether the story's worth telling. Sarah leaned forward. But do it fast. We've got 42 days left before the Territorial Council rules. After that, it might be too late. Reeves looked at the testimonies again, longer this time. Then he sighed. I'll investigate. No promises beyond that. If the facts check out, I'll consider running it. But if I find out you've exaggerated or lied about anything, you won't, Caleb said quietly. Every word in those documents is true. Some of it's probably worse than what we wrote. They left the newspaper office with cautious hope. On the ride back to the valley, Sarah felt the exhaustion of the past week catch up with her. They'd ridden hundreds of miles, told the same story dozens of times, faced rejection and fear and the weight of other people's trauma. You did good work today, Caleb said as they crossed into Mercerland. The way you handled Reeves, pushing him without making him defensive. That was smart. I just told him the truth. You did more than that. You made him see himself as part of the story, made him imagine explaining to his child why he'd chosen cowardice over courage. Caleb glanced at her. That's not just truth. That's understanding people, knowing what motivates them. Sarah thought about her family, about spending 24 years watching people choose comfort over honesty. Maybe that was its own education, learning to recognize when fear was making decisions instead of conviction. 3 days later, armed riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Sarah spotted them first, 6 men on horseback, silhouetted against the late afternoon sky, close enough to be a message but far enough to avoid being immediately threatening. They didn't approach. They just sat there, watching, making sure everyone knew they were being watched. Tom assembled the ranch hands, organized watch rotations, distributed weapons. The atmosphere on the ranch shifted from determined to tense, everyone moving a little faster, looking over their shoulders a little more often. It's intimidation, Caleb said that night, though his rifle leaned against the wall within easy reach. Trent's reminding us he can reach us anytime he wants, making us nervous, making us make mistakes. Is it working? Sarah asked. A little, yes, but fear cuts both ways. His men sitting up there watching us makes him look scared, makes it obvious he's worried about what we're doing. Or he's waiting for the right moment to do something worse. Caleb didn't argue. They both knew it was true. The riders stayed for 3 days, a rotating presence on the ridge. Then, on the 4th morning, they were gone. What arrived instead was a letter delivered by official courier. Another legal document, this one even more threatening than the last. Blackwood Holdings was now suing Caleb personally for harboring fugitives from legitimate eviction orders, for defamation of character regarding Victor Trent, and for interfering with lawful business operations. The amount demanded, $20,000. $20,000. Sarah stared at the number, her mind unable to fully process it. That's everything. Caleb's voice was flat. That's the ranch, the herd, every asset I have. If they win this suit, we lose it all. Can they win? In a fair court? No, but we're not operating in fair courts anymore. He refolded the document carefully, his hands steady despite what this meant. Trent's done playing games. He's going for the kill. Sarah felt rage surge through her, hot and clarifying. Then we stop playing by his rules entirely. Where's Daniel Reeves with his investigation? He said another week. He's still verifying. We don't have another week. We've got 39 days until the council rules, and now we've got this lawsuit hanging over our heads. We need that story published now. Sarah, if Reeves publishes before he's verified everything, Trent will sue him too, destroy him. We can't ask him to take that risk. Then we give him something he can verify immediately, something Trent can't deny or explain away. Sarah's mind was racing. The canyon. When Trent's men shot at us. That wasn't legal intimidation, that was attempted murder. If we can identify those men, prove they work for Blackwood Holdings, we were in the dark. None of us saw faces. But someone hired them. Someone gave them orders. Someone paid them. Sarah grabbed the lawsuit papers. Trent's getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. We just need to find the mistake. Tom appeared in the doorway. You two better come outside. We've got visitors. They followed him to find Marcus Webb back in their yard, this time with a dozen armed men instead of 5. Webb sat on his horse with that same smooth smile, holding a new set of papers. Mr. Mercer, I've come to personally deliver notice of Blackwood Holdings' lawsuit. I'm sure you've already received it by courier, but Mr. Trent wanted to make sure there was no confusion about the seriousness of his intent. I'm clear on his intent, Caleb said coldly. He wants to steal my ranch the same way he stole from those families. Only difference is he's using lawsuits instead of fraudulent evictions. Careful, Mercer. Defamation is one of the charges in that suit. Every word you speak against Mr. Trent just adds to the damages he can claim. Webb's smile widened. But he's a generous man. He's authorized me to offer you a settlement. Drop your support for the Carson, Hayes, and Drummond families. Publicly retract any accusations against Blackwood Holdings. Pay a modest settlement of $5,000. Do all that, and the lawsuit goes away. Or I could tell you to go to hell, Caleb said flatly, which is my actual response. Webb's smile didn't falter. You're making a mistake. You can't win this fight. The law is on our side. The courts are on our side. Every day you resist costs you money, reputation, and safety. Why die on this hill? Because someone has to. Sarah stepped forward before she could stop herself. Because if no one stands up to men like Trent, he'll keep stealing and lying and destroying lives until there's nothing left worth fighting for. Webb looked at her like she was a curiosity. Mrs. Mercer, I've heard you've been busy collecting stories, trying to turn public opinion against us. That's cute. But public opinion doesn't win lawsuits. Money and power do. And you have neither. We have truth. Truth is whatever a judge says it is. Webb gathered his reins. You have 1 week to accept the settlement offer. After that, the price goes up. And Mr. Trent stops being generous. He rode off with his armed escort, leaving dust and tension in his wake. $5,000, Tom said quietly. That's everything we've made this year. And that's the generous offer. Which means the $20,000 lawsuit is designed to force us to accept the settlement. Caleb's voice was tight. Classic squeeze play. Make the alternative so terrifying that people jump at the generous option. Sarah watched the riders disappear over the ridge. What if we don't respond at all? What if we just keep moving forward like none of this matters? Then they'll escalate. The lawsuit moves forward, the pressure increases, and eventually something breaks. Probably us. Caleb turned toward the house. I need to think, figure out our next move. But Sarah's mind was already working. Webb's visit had been designed to intimidate, but it had also revealed something important. Trent was getting impatient. The lawsuit, the settlement offer, the show of force, all of it reeked of desperation disguised as strength, which meant they were closer to breaking him than she'd thought. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah sat at the dining table surrounded by all the documents they'd collected. Testimonies from victims, land records, the lawsuit papers. Everything felt like separate pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite see the shape of. Then her eyes caught on something in the surveyor's documents from the Capitol. A notation she'd missed before, half hidden in the official language. A surveyor's name, Thomas Whitfield. She pulled out the testimonies, scanning through them. There, the widow whose mining claim had been stolen. She'd mentioned the surveyor who'd mapped her late husband's claim, Thomas Whitfield. And in the shopkeeper's statement, a reference to a property survey that had mysteriously changed after the original surveyor died. No name given, but the timeline matched. Sarah's heart started racing. She grabbed another document, then another, cross-referencing dates and names. The pattern emerged like a ghost taking shape. Thomas Whitfield had surveyed multiple properties that were later stolen by Blackwood Holdings. And according to the territorial records, he'd died 6 months ago in an accidental fall from a horse. The same convenient timing as the land office clerk who'd processed the Carson deeds. Sarah was still sitting there, documents spread around her like evidence of conspiracy, when Caleb found her at dawn. You've been up all night, he said, not quite a question. Look at this. She pushed the papers toward him, explaining what she'd found. It's not just the deeds disappearing. It's the people who could verify them. The clerk, the surveyor, both dead within months of each other. Both in accidents that were never investigated. And every property they handled ended up in Blackwood Holdings' possession. Caleb studied the documents, his expression growing darker. You think Trent had them killed? I think it's too convenient to be coincidence. And I think if we can prove it, if we can show a pattern of witnesses dying right before their testimony might matter, that changes everything. That's not legal maneuvering. That's murder. We need proof, real proof, not just suspicious timing. Then we find it. Sarah's voice was hard. Trent made a mistake going after the surveyor. Survey records are public. If Whitfield suspected something was wrong, if he made notes or kept records, they might still exist somewhere. In his office, his home, somewhere Trent's people didn't think to look. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, sharp and fierce. You're terrifying when you're angry. Good. Maybe Trent should be scared of me. I think he already is. Caleb stood, gathering the documents. All right. We're riding to Silver Creek today. We bring this to Daniel Reeves, show him what you found. If he can verify even part of it, this stops being about land disputes and becomes about murder and conspiracy. That's a story big enough that even Trent can't bury it. They rode out within the hour, Tom and 2 ranch hands coming as protection. The trip to Silver Creek felt different this time, not desperate, but purposeful. They had a thread to pull, a way to unravel Trent's entire operation. Daniel Reeves listened to Sarah's theory with his usual skepticism, but his eyes sharpened when he saw the documentation. If you're right about this pattern, if these deaths weren't accidents, that's huge. But proving it means digging into closed investigations, finding evidence the territorial authorities already said doesn't exist. Can you do it? Sarah asked. Sarah, I can try. I know someone in the territorial marshal's office who owes me a favor. Might be willing to look at the accident reports, see if anything was overlooked. Reeves hesitated. But understand what you're really asking me to pursue. If Trent killed these men to cover up his fraud, he won't hesitate to kill anyone else who gets too close to the truth, including journalists. I know. Sarah met his eyes. Which is why it matters that someone tells this story. Because if we all stay silent out of fear, men like Trent win. They keep killing and stealing and destroying, and nobody ever stops them. Reeves studied her, then looked at Caleb. Your wife's either very brave or very naive. Both, Caleb said. That's what makes her dangerous. All right, give me a week. I'll investigate the surveyor angle, see what I can verify. But if I publish this, I'm burning every bridge I have with the territorial establishment. There's no going back from accusing Victor Trent of murder. There's no going back from letting him get away with it either, Sarah said. They left Reeves with copies of all their documentation and rode back toward the valley as storm clouds gathered over the mountains. Sarah felt the weight of what they'd set in motion, the accusations they'd made, the stakes they'd raised, the point of no return they'd just crossed. You know this makes everything more dangerous, Caleb said as they rode. If Trent suspects we're investigating those deaths, then we'd better move faster than he does. Sarah looked at the darkening sky. How many days until the council ruling now? 34. 34 days to expose a conspiracy, prove multiple murders, turn public opinion, and somehow survive long enough to see justice done. Sarah had never been good at impossible odds, but she'd never had a reason to fight like this before. A purpose bigger than herself, people depending on her, a partner who actually believed she was capable of making a difference. The storm broke as they reached the valley, rain pouring down in sheets that soaked them within minutes. But Sarah barely felt the cold. She was too busy calculating their next moves, too focused on the fight ahead to care about discomfort. Somewhere out there, Victor Trent was probably sitting in a comfortable office, confident his money and power would crush them like they'd crushed everyone else. He had no idea what was coming, and by the time he figured it out, it would be too late. Daniel Reeves arrived at the ranch 6 days later, riding hard with a leather satchel clutched against his chest like it contained something that could explode. Sarah saw him coming from the kitchen window and knew immediately he'd found something. She met him in the yard with Caleb and Tom. Reeves dismounted, his face pale, but his eyes burning with the kind of intensity that came from stumbling onto truth bigger than you'd expected. I found it, he said without preamble. The connection, but it's worse than you thought. They moved inside, away from curious ears. Reeves spread documents across the dining table. Official reports, witness statements, correspondence that looked like it had been copied in haste. Thomas Whitfield didn't die in a riding accident, Reeves said. My contact in the marshal's office pulled the original investigation file. It was closed within 3 days, ruled accidental, based on the testimony of one witness, a man named Crawford, who claimed to have seen Whitfield's horse spook and throw him. But here's the interesting part. He tapped one of the documents. Crawford works for Blackwood Holdings, has for 4 years. He's listed on their payroll as a land acquisition specialist. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. They sent their own man to witness the murder and call it an accident. Not just Whitfield, the clerk too, Samuel Brennan. He supposedly fell downstairs in the territorial office. But the night janitor reported seeing 2 men in expensive suits leaving the building right before Brennan's body was discovered. The janitor gave descriptions to the marshal. Nothing was ever done with it. Reeves pulled out another document. I found the janitor, tracked him down in a settlement 3 counties away. He's been in hiding for 6 months. Terrified Trent's men will come for him next. But he identified Crawford from a photograph. Said he was one of the men leaving the territorial office the night Brennan died. That's 2 murders, Caleb said quietly. Provable murders, with witnesses and documentation. 3, actually. Reeves's voice was grim. I kept digging. Found another death from 18 months ago. A homesteader named Samuel Morrison, who'd been fighting Blackwood Holdings over water rights. He drowned in a creek everyone in his settlement knew was shallow enough to wade across. Same pattern, quick investigation, accidental ruling, no follow-up. And guess whose name appears in the witness statement? Crawford, Sarah said. Crawford. Reeves nodded. The man's essentially a professional killer operating under the cover of land acquisition. And the territorial authorities have been looking the other way because Victor Trent has them all bought and paid for. Tom let out a low whistle. You publish this, you're accusing half the territorial government of being complicit in murder. I know. Reeves met their eyes. Which is why I'm not just publishing it in Silver Creek. I've sent copies to every major newspaper in the territory. The Copper Falls Gazette, the Capital Tribune, the Western Journal. By this time tomorrow, this story will be everywhere. Trent can't bury what everyone's already reading. Sarah felt her heart hammering. He'll come after you. Probably, but I've got my family on a stage to San Francisco as we speak. My wife's brother has a printing business there. We'll start over if we have to. Reeves's jaw was set. Some stories matter more than safety. This is one of them. When does it publish? Caleb asked. Tomorrow morning. Front page, full story, all the documentation. Reeves started gathering his papers. I came here first because you should know what's coming. Trent's going to explode, and he's going to come for everyone involved in exposing him, including you. Let him come. Sarah's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. We've been waiting. After Reeves left, they spent the rest of the day preparing. Tom organized the ranch hands into defensive positions. The displaced families were moved to the most secure buildings. Weapons were distributed, ammunition counted, watch rotations established. It felt like preparing for war, because that's exactly what it was. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She found Caleb in his office, staring at papers without really seeing them. You should rest, she said from the doorway. So should you. He set down the papers. But neither of us will, so we might as well be awake together. She sat across from him, studying his face in the lamplight. He looked tired, deep in the bones tired that came from carrying too much weight for too long. Are you scared? Terrified. His honesty surprised her. I've risked the ranch before, made gambles on cattle prices or weather, but this is different. This isn't about losing money or property. People could die tomorrow. People I'm responsible for. You didn't start this fight. Trent did. But I chose to stand and fight instead of backing down. That was my choice. And if people get hurt because of it, his voice cracked slightly. Sarah, I'm good at ranching, good at business. But this? Leading people into danger? I don't know if I'm good at this. She reached across the desk, covering his hand with hers. You're doing what's right. That's the only thing that matters. Is it? Because right now I'm wondering if I should have just paid Trent's settlement, sent those families somewhere safe. Let him win this round. He looked at her. Would that have been cowardice or wisdom? It would have been surrender, and surrender just means he destroys the next family, and the one after that, and keeps destroying until someone finally stops him. Sarah's grip tightened. You're stopping him. We're stopping him. That's not cowardice. Even if it costs us everything? Especially if it costs us everything, because that's when it means the most. She paused. Caleb, My whole life I watched people choose safety over honor, choose silence over truth, choose their own comfort over other people's lives. And you know what I learned? That comfort turns poisonous. It rots you from the inside until you can't even remember what you used to believe in. I won't live like that. Not anymore. He studied her face for a long moment. When did you get so brave? I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid. She stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we finish this. But tomorrow came with gunfire instead of newspapers. The riders appeared at dawn, not 6 this time, but 20, heavily armed and moving with military precision toward the ranch. Sarah was in the kitchen with Ruth when Tom's shout went up from the perimeter. She grabbed the rifle she'd kept loaded by the door and ran outside. Caleb was already on the porch, his own rifle in hand, watching the approaching riders with a face like stone. Everyone to positions, he called, his voice carrying across the yard. No one shoots unless they shoot first. But be ready. The ranch hands scattered to predetermined spots, behind the water trough, in the barn loft, at the corners of buildings. Sarah took position beside Caleb on the porch, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. The riders stopped 50 yards out. Crawford dismounted. Sarah recognized him from the description Reeves had provided. Tall, thin, with cold eyes and a professional killer's calm. He walked forward alone, stopping at the base of the porch steps. Caleb Mercer, Crawford said, his voice carrying in the still morning air. I'm here on behalf of Blackwood Holdings to execute the legal eviction order for this property. You've been given multiple opportunities to comply peacefully. This is your final warning. There is no eviction order for this property, Caleb said flatly. You're trespassing on private land with armed men. That's a felony. I have documents signed by a territorial judge. Crawford pulled papers from his coat. Your lawsuit was expedited and ruled in favor of Blackwood Holdings. This ranch is now legally seized to cover damages. You have 1 hour to vacate. That's a lie. Sarah's voice cut through the tension. The lawsuit hasn't even gone to trial yet. Whatever papers you're holding are fraudulent. Crawford's eyes shifted to her. Mrs. Mercer, I'd advise you to stay out of this. Women shouldn't involve themselves in legal matters they don't understand. I understand that you're a murderer. The words came out before Sarah could stop them, but she didn't want to stop them. You killed Thomas Whitfield. You killed Samuel Brennan. You killed Samuel Morrison, and you did it all for Victor Trent. Something flickered in Crawford's expression. Surprise, maybe, that someone had connected the dots. Behind him, the other rider shifted nervously. Careful, Mrs. Mercer. Accusations like that are dangerous. So is murder. Sarah raised her rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at him, but making her intention clear. And as of tomorrow morning, everyone in the territory is going to know what you are. The Territorial Truth is publishing the full story. Your name, your crimes, the witnesses who saw you. You're finished. Crawford's face went cold. The newspaper won't publish anything. We've already handled that. Have you? Caleb's voice was sharp. Because Daniel Reeves sent copies to every major newspaper in the territory. You'd have to silence all of them, and I doubt you managed that overnight. For the first time, Crawford looked uncertain. He glanced back at his men, and Sarah saw the moment his confidence cracked. This is your last chance, Crawford said, but there was less authority in his voice now. Surrender the property or what? Tom called from the barn. You'll murder us all like you murdered those others, with 20 witnesses watching? Go ahead and try. See how long you stay out of a noose. The standoff held for a terrible moment, everyone's fingers on triggers, violence hanging in the air like smoke. Then, from the direction of the main road, Sarah heard something that sounded like thunder. But it wasn't thunder. It was horses, dozens of them. Crawford turned and Sarah saw genuine fear cross his face as riders crested the ridge. Ranchers from neighboring properties, settlers from nearby towns, people who'd heard about the confrontation and come armed. Robert Bennett led them, his weathered face grim. Crawford, Bennett called out. You're outnumbered about 3-1 right now. I'd suggest you and your men ride out while you still can. This is legal business. There's nothing legal about what Blackwood Holdings has been doing, and as of about an hour ago, everyone knows it. Bennett held up a newspaper, early edition, rushed printing, but unmistakably real. The Capital Tribune published this at midnight, got rushed copies delivered to every major town in the territory. It's over, Crawford. The whole territory knows about the murders, the fraud, everything. You want to add 20 more bodies to your count in front of all these witnesses? Crawford stood frozen, clearly calculating his options and finding them all bad. Finally, he remounted his horse. This isn't finished. Yes, it is. Caleb's voice was hard. Ride back to Trent and tell him it's over. Tell him the law is coming for him now, real law, not the corrupt officials he's bought. Tell him Sarah Mercer destroyed him. Crawford rode off with his men, and the tension shattered like broken glass. Sarah's legs went weak, and she had to sit down on the porch steps before she fell. Caleb sat beside her, and they watched the sun rise over the valley, surrounded by neighbors who'd risked their own safety to stand with them. Did you know they were coming? Sarah asked Bennett as he dismounted. Got word yesterday that something was brewing. Figured you could use backup. Bennett grinned. Plus, I wanted to see the look on Crawford's face when he realized he was beat. Worth the ride. The next few days were a whirlwind. The story exploded across the territory. Not just Reeves's paper, but every newspaper, every town meeting, every conversation. Victor Trent's name became synonymous with corruption and murder. Politicians who'd protected him suddenly found convenient reasons to distance themselves. Judges who'd ruled in his favor announced they were reviewing their decisions. The territorial marshal finally opened formal investigations into the deaths of Whitfield, Brennan, and Morrison. Within a week, arrest warrants were issued for Crawford and 3 other Blackwood Holdings employees. Victor Trent himself was summoned to testify before the Territorial Council. Sarah and Caleb attended that hearing with the displaced families. The council chambers were packed with people who'd come to watch the mighty fall. Trent sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit and confident smile looking increasingly out of place. The questioning was brutal. Council members who'd once protected him now competed to condemn him loudest, eager to save their own political careers. Trent tried to deflect, to claim ignorance of his employees' actions, to maintain the fiction that he was just a businessman caught up in unfortunate circumstances. Then they called Sarah to testify. She stood before the council, aware of every eye in the room on her. 6 weeks ago, she'd been the unwanted daughter nobody believed in. Now she was the woman who'd brought down an empire. Mrs. Mercer, the council chairman said, you were instrumental in uncovering the fraud perpetrated by Blackwood Holdings. Can you explain for this council how you connected the various crimes? Sarah took a breath, organized her thoughts, and began speaking. She told them about the displaced families, about the pattern of disappeared deeds and convenient deaths, about the testimonies they'd collected and the investigation they'd pursued. She spoke clearly, factually, without embellishment or emotion. Just the truth, laid out piece by piece, until even Trent's lawyers couldn't find holes in it. When she finished, the room was silent. Then the chairman spoke. Mr. Trent, this council finds overwhelming evidence of systematic fraud, corruption, and conspiracy to commit murder within your organization. We are referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor for criminal charges. Additionally, we are nullifying all land transfers made by Blackwood Holdings pending review. The families evicted from their properties are hereby authorized to return to their lands immediately. Trent's face went white. You can't. This is politically motivated. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, the marshal said, standing. Victor Trent, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. Sarah watched them take him away in chains, this man who'd seemed untouchable just weeks ago, and felt something complicated in her chest. Not quite satisfaction. There'd been too much pain, too much loss, too many lives destroyed for simple satisfaction, but something close to justice. Imperfect, incomplete, but real. Outside the council chambers, Jacob Carson found her in the crowd. His wife and children stood with him, tears streaming down Ellen's face. We're going home, Jacob said, his voice breaking. Tomorrow morning, we're going home because of you. Sarah shook her head. Because of all of us. You stood up first, when it would have been easier to just accept defeat. That mattered. But you made people listen. You made people care. That's... Jacob stopped, unable to continue. Ellen hugged Sarah hard enough to hurt. Thank you. There aren't better words, but thank you. Sarah hugged her back, feeling the weight of everything they'd been through settle into something softer. Relief, maybe. Or just the exhaustion that came after fighting so hard for so long. The Hayes and Drummond families returned to their lands within the week. Other families who'd been evicted by Blackwood Holdings began returning too, dozens of them, reclaiming what had been stolen. The territorial prosecutor brought formal charges against Trent, Crawford, and 6 other Blackwood employees. The trials would take months, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. At the Mercer Ranch, life slowly returned to normal. Ruth stopped keeping a rifle in the kitchen. The ranch hands stopped checking the ridges for armed riders. The tension that had defined their lives for weeks finally eased. One evening, about a month after Trent's arrest, Sarah found Caleb on their porch now, truly theirs in a way it hadn't been before. She sat beside him, and they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and red. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "That I never expected my life to turn out like this." Sarah leaned back, feeling the worn wood of the chair beneath her. 6 months ago, I was living in my parents' house, convinced I was the problem, that I was broken somehow, defective, wrong. And now you're the woman who destroyed a criminal empire. Now I know the truth. Sarah looked at him. I was never broken. I was just surrounded by people who needed me to believe I was. People who benefited from me staying small and quiet and convinced of my own worthlessness. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Have you heard from your family since the news spread?" "A letter arrived last week from my mother." Sarah's voice was neutral. "She wanted to reconcile, said she always knew I had potential, that she was proud of what I'd accomplished, that families should support each other. She invited me to visit, bring you, show you off to their friends." "What did you say?" Nothing. I burned the letter." Sarah met his eyes. "I spent 24 years begging for their approval, trying to become someone they'd actually love. And I finally realized they never will, because they don't know how. They only see people as useful or inconvenient, valuable or worthless. And I'm done trying to be valuable to people incapable of recognizing real worth." That must have hurt. It did. But it also felt like freedom. Sarah reached for his hand. "You know what the difference is between my family and what we built here? My family loved me conditionally, only when I served their purposes, fit their expectations, made them look good. But you, Tom, Ruth, those families we helped, you all saw me for who I actually was and decided I was worth standing beside. Not because I was perfect or useful, but because I was willing to fight for what mattered. That's the difference between approval and respect. And I'll take respect every time." "Ite," Caleb squeezed her hand. "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I sent that proposal. I'm glad you took the risk." "So am I." Sarah smiled. "Even though you turned my life completely upside down. You did the same to mine," but his voice was warm. "Fair trade." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began appearing, the same stars that had witnessed everything, the fear, the fights, the victories, the slow building of something real between two people who'd started as strangers. "What happens now?" Sarah asked eventually. "After the trials, after everything settles, what do we do?" "We keep building. The ranch, the valley, this life we've started." Caleb looked at her. "And we help other people do the same. There are more Victor Trents out there, more families being crushed by people with money and power. Maybe we become the ones who stand up for them. Make that our purpose." "You want to keep fighting. I want to keep mattering, same as you." He paused. "Think you can handle that? A lifetime of standing up to powerful people who'd rather we stayed quiet?" Sarah thought about the market in Black Hollow Ridge, about that moment 3 years ago when she'd stood alone to defend an old man. She thought about the scared girl who'd ridden into this valley expecting nothing, and the woman she'd become, harder, stronger, clearer about what she believed and why. "Yes," she said, "I can handle that." And she meant it. The territorial court eventually convicted Victor Trent of fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, his fortune seized and distributed to his victims. Crawford and his accomplices received even harsher sentences. The corrupt officials who'd protected them were removed from office, replaced by people who actually believed in justice. It wasn't perfect. Systems that broken didn't heal overnight. But it was a start, and starting was sometimes the hardest part. Sarah's story spread beyond the territory, carried by newspapers and word of mouth. She received letters from other women who'd been told they were too difficult, too stubborn, too much. Women who'd spent their lives trying to be smaller, quieter, less. women who read about what she'd done and decided maybe they could stand up too. She answered every letter, told them the truth, that standing up was terrifying, that it cost something, that you didn't always win, but that the alternative was worse, that staying silent poisoned you slowly until you couldn't remember who you'd been before you learned to disappear. 5 years later, the Mercer Ranch was the largest in the territory, but size wasn't what made it matter. It mattered because workers were treated fairly, because families in trouble found shelter there, because Caleb and Sarah had built something that stood for more than just profit. They'd built a place where honesty counted, where speaking truth wasn't punished, where ordinary people could find protection against powerful ones. Sarah stood on the porch one morning, watching their ranch hands work, and thought about how strange life was, how the daughter nobody wanted had become someone people sought out for help and guidance, how the woman her family had thrown away like garbage had proven to be exactly what the valley needed. She thought about her mother's letter, about that offer of reconciliation that had really just been an attempt to claim credit for Sarah's success, about her father who'd called her a burden, her sisters who'd mocked her, all the people who'd spent years convincing her she was wrong and broken and worthless. And she felt something she'd never expected to feel about them: pity, because they'd had something valuable and they'd thrown it away. They'd had a daughter who would have fought for them, stood beside them, helped them build something meaningful. And they'd been too blind to see it, too caught up in appearance and reputation and shallow measures of worth to recognize what actually mattered: their loss, her gain. Caleb found her there, slipped an arm around her waist, and they stood together watching the sun climb over the mountains. Two stubborn people who'd refused to accept the limitations other people tried to put on them, who'd fought when fighting seemed impossible, stood when standing seemed stupid, believed in justice when the entire system was corrupt. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Sarah leaned into him. "That every hard thing that happened brought me here. That the people who tried to break me actually just cleared away everything that wasn't essential, until all that was left was the part of me that mattered most." "Which part is that?" "The part that refuses to stay silent. The part that fights for what's right even when it's hard. The part my family hated and you loved." She turned to look at him. "The real part. The honest part. The part that won't disappear no matter how many people wish I would." Caleb smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made her heart catch. "Good. Don't ever disappear. The world needs more people like you." "People like us," Sarah corrected. "We did this together." "Together," he agreed. And in the untamed frontier where cruelty and corruption had ruled for too long, where powerful men had crushed ordinary families without consequence, two people who refused to accept injustice had proven something important. They'd proven that standing up mattered. That truth was stronger than money. That ordinary people, when they found their courage and their voice, could topple empires built on lies. But more than that, they'd proven something Sarah had needed to learn her whole life: that she wasn't broken. She'd never been broken. She was exactly who she was supposed to be, fierce and honest and uncompromising in her belief that people deserved better than what the world often gave them. The daughter nobody wanted had become the woman everyone needed. And in becoming that woman, she'd finally learned the most important truth of all. Worth isn't given by other people. It isn't earned through obedience or silence or making yourself small enough to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. Worth is claimed. It's declared. It's demonstrated through action and choice and the willingness to stand up even when standing up costs everything. Sarah had claimed her worth, and nobody, not her family, not Victor Trent, not anyone, could ever take it away from her again. As the morning light spread across the valley, warming everything it touched, Sarah Mercer stood beside the man who'd seen her value when nobody else would. In the home they'd defended together, surrounded by the life they'd built from courage and stubbornness and an unshakable belief that justice mattered. And she was finally, truly, completely home.